There are generally three reasons why someone who commits the kind of heinous and evil and horrible acts that the defendant committed in this case would attempt to kill themselves after they committed those acts. The first one is that their conscience just won't let them live with it. They can't live with themselves after they've done something this horrific. The second reason is that they want to avoid the consequences of their actions. They can't live with those consequences. And the third reason, perhaps the most insidious reason of all, is that they do it in order to fake it, to escape the consequences for those actions. Those are the three primary reasons why someone would do such a thing. In this instance, it doesn't even matter which explanation is true as to the defendant and why she attempted to kill herself after she killed her children. All three of them point directly to the defendant's guilt and refute her claim of insanity. You can't have consciousness of guilt if you can't apprehend your guilt. And when you apprehend your guilt, you're completely sane. People understand this. The judge is in fact going to instruct you about consciousness of guilt and how you can potentially apply the defendant's post-killing actions to her state of mind, in which she gets ultimately held responsible. Her implausible explanation of what happens seeks to coldly take advantage of our humanity. The humanity that doesn't want to believe that any sane mother would ever do what she did. The humanity that desperately yearns to grasp that straw that explains what happened here so we can understand. She knows that you're looking for an explanation for that because the truth is so hard to stomach, isn't it? Her maudlin, self-aggrandized attempts, though, have failed. It failed because the actual evidence definitively refutes the explanation she wants you to adopt. The best way, by a very wide margin, to know what was in her mind at the time that she killed her children is to examine her actions at and around the time. Not months later, relying on an after-the-fact, self-serving explanations from a psychologist who wasn't there. We don't need a psychologist because we have common sense. And that's another thing the judge is going to instruct you about. He's going to tell you that you should draw on your own common sense and life experience when deciding these matters. Listen, every mom understands how hard this is. In your mind's eye, and everyone's mind's eye here, we can hear the 8-month-old crying with hunger. We can hear the 3-year-old crying because he fell down and he's pulling at mom's skirts and looking for comfort. We can hear the 5-year-old over and over asking constantly, when are we going to eat? What are we going to eat? And then when you answer, why are we eating that? Why aren't we eating this? All those things happening at the same time. It can feel overwhelming in those moments, just as it has for billions and billions of mothers over the centuries who didn't end the chaos by choking the lives out of their own little children. My wife likes to tell the story about how when our kids were roughly the ages of Cora and Dawson, she was having a particularly difficult day. There was a lot of yelling and screaming, complaining, fighting, and she just needed to escape for a few minutes. So she walked into our pantry and she closed the door behind her while the kids were pounding on the door and screaming, "Mama, Mama, Mama." And she just sat there for a couple minutes because she needed that break. She needed that recharging of batteries. And she knew that as long as she heard the kids right outside the door, they were fine and nothing bad was happening and they were alive. And that was the really important thing. And then she emerged a little bit later and continued on with the duties of motherhood that she's done so well. I want to examine with you the evidence that proves her sanity and points to her guilt and responsibility, the defendant's guilt and responsibility in this case. There are different categories of evidence I'm going to review with you and that I want to talk about, and each one points definitively in one direction and away from the direction she wants you to take. So the first category of evidence is that she purposely planned and created opportunity and timing with which to commit the offense. We know that she sent her husband on an errand to go pick up takeout. And while it's maybe not unusual in and of itself, in this instance it was, because this time she sent him to a restaurant they had never gotten takeout from before, and that was much more distant from the places where they usually got their food. This was something that was out of the ordinary and would naturally take him out of the home for a more extended period of time. Second of all, we know she used phone maps then to check travel times to the restaurant and how long it would take for him to go and come back while she could be alone with the children. And that's what she did. She expanded the alone time she would have with the children in order to commit these horrible acts. The second category of evidence that we want you to consider when deciding about her state of mind was the evidence of contemporaneous sane and reasonable behavior that we heard from that day and the times surrounding that day. First of all, witnesses testified and described her as being fully coherent when they encountered her that day. We know that she took one of the children to a doctor's appointment, and that's evidence of goal-directed activity and perhaps even more. Because in this instance, the goal wasn't so much the child's health, obviously. The goal was her defense. She wanted to be able to say, oh, I snapped later. Well, obviously, no one planning to kill their child would take them to the doctor. It fits perfectly with her idea that she's going to somehow get away with this after she does it, and she knows exactly how she's going to do that. Her journals and notebooks from the time demonstrate clear, precise, articulate writing about daily activities, an understanding of her own mental health, her medications, and zero indication of disordered thought, which is pretty important when we're considering this evidence. The third category is the digital and phone activity that took place before and around the time of the killings. We know that the defendant searched in the weeks and days leading up to the killings as sort of a how-to approach to killing your kids and getting away with it. People hallucinating don't research hallucinating. People who have psychosis don't research psychosis. People with side effects from drugs call their doctors. People who are insane for a moment where they snap haven't previously researched how to kill their children ahead of time, but she did all of those things. The next category of evidence that's important is her post-killing communications. So we know that after the killings took place and she was in the hospital, even when she was intubated, she was able to communicate. The defendant communicated through written notes. She expressed horror. She asked about her legal situation. She inquired about her physical injuries, and she wondered about visitors and where different members of her family might be located. Why is that important? Well, because these are all common examples of how a sane person reacts in her situation in its immediate aftermath. The next category that I want you to consider is the fact that she was active in framing and really just the framing of her choices. And what does that mean? We know that she had and used her access to mental health care, that she had multiple providers, multiple medications, and that she changed providers when she was dissatisfied, that she made deliberate and intentional decisions after treatment, that she, importantly, denied any plans to harm herself or her kids when she had an opportunity to communicate such ideations. None. She never said anything to anybody. That's important. We know also, very important, that the contemporaneous evaluations at and around the time that these actions took place did not diagnose severe postpartum depression or psychosis. Very important. And finally, the category of evidence we want you to consider is the method and sequence of her behavior. And what does that mean? One by one by one, she carried out the killings. At any point in the process of sending her husband away, checking her phone app to find out how long it would take, gathering the children where she wanted them, obtaining the exercise bands she would use to strangle them, and then following through with her executions. At any point along that timeline, she could have stopped. When her children stared at her with eyes reflecting fear and horror and betrayal, she could have stopped. But her actions were methodical, deliberate, and intentional. She clearly had a job to do, and she did it. And when she finished, we can be confident that her consciousness of guilt, for one of the three reasons that I mentioned in the beginning, drove her to cut herself and jump out of the window. In this context, those actions and the immediate aftermath make all the sense in the world. Completely sane response. This trial has naturally focused on the defendant, her thoughts, her feelings, her actions. And of course, that makes sense. This trial is about her. But it's not just about her, is it? It's about them. Her children, Cora, Dawson, Callan. And it's about the kind of justice we're going to give them also. My daughter has an 8-month-old daughter of her own now, and she sometimes comes to our house and drops her off for a few hours to spend time with Lolly and Papa, and we love that time with our grandchild at 8 months old, and she's becoming very interactive, and it's a lot of fun. But no matter how much fun she's having and we're having, when my daughter walks back through the door, our granddaughter immediately reaches for her and cries for her and wants her to come pick her up. Doesn't matter that she was perfectly happy and content just a minute before. She knows it's her mom. Her mom is back. Everything's okay. I've often told this story in a different context, but I think it makes sense here. When my wife and I were young parents, we did what most young parents do. We took our children to the doctor, and part of that process meant getting immunizations to protect them from future debilitating diseases, of course. And so when you go and you take your kid to the doctor and you hand her over, or you hand him over to the nurse, there's this look of uncertainty in their eyes, like, what are we doing here? And why have you given me to this stranger? And that uncertainty, as time goes by, becomes increasing discomfort. And then at some point, the needle gets produced and the child is stuck with the needle. At that moment, there are several things going on. First is pain, crying from pain. But the second, and the one that's the most heart-wrenching, is that stare that you get from them as the tears are rolling down that says, you have betrayed me. Why did you hand me over to these people and not only stood by while pain was caused to me, but also facilitated the causing of pain to me? And of course, we can't explain to them that it's okay. This is for your benefit. Trust us. We got this. It was a very different situation, though, for Cora and for Dawson and for Callan. They were forced to go that one step further that no child should have to go. At some point, it didn't matter anymore that the defendant was their mother. As they stared into this woman's eyes with feelings of fear and betrayal, the woman they knew who was supposed to nurture and encourage and heal them, at some point, all they could do was revert to the basic human instinct that we have as living human beings. And that instinct is survival. Fight to survive. There would be no other explanation for them. The ultimate safe place for us as children is in our mother's arms and in her lap. It is from there that we eat. We cuddle to connect to her loving motherly touch. We nap peacefully. We get our boo-boos healed. We receive comfort. We feel warmth. and we know that we're safe. The defendant, she knows this. She knew it then too. Her solution to the trials and difficulties of motherhood was to end her motherhood by slowly and deliberately squeezing the life from each of her children in turn, one by one by one. She was deliberate enough to plan it. She had the ability to stop it at any point. And now she should be deliberately held accountable. Now there's not going to be any first birthday cake for Callan. There's going to be no kindergarten classes for Dawson. There's going to be no piano lessons for Cora. None of them are going to ever play Little League or make lifelong friends or graduate from high school or wear that wedding dress and have her dad walk her down the aisle or stand next to the preacher while the love of his life approaches him at the altar, or mother or father kids of their own. The only thing that any of us can do now is to hold the defendant accountable, fully accountable. You can make her stop. You can punish her. It's perfectly okay to judge people's actions and to punish them for those actions. We aren't asking you to decide anybody's heart today. We're not asking you to decide that the defendant was a bad person or heck, even a bad mother. That's not really a judgment we're here to make or that mankind should make. But we are asking, and your oath holds you to this, that you do justice based on her actions, her cold, calculating, deliberate, and premeditated actions. Nothing good comes from this for anyone. Cora, Dawson, Callan are dead by her hand. Patrick no longer has the family he thought he had. The defendant is on trial and being held responsible for what she did. The best we can do now is to do what's right, and that means holding the defendant fully accountable for what she did by finding her guilty and rejecting her continuing callous attempts to marginalize and erase her own children in this story, the children she killed. Holding her fully accountable is what's right, and it's what's just. We ask you to return a verdict of guilty on all charges. In that way, each little one gets the only justice that remains for them. Thank you.